Welcome to the Configure Price Quote podcast. My name is Frank Sohn and I'm the founder of CPQ Consulting. This podcast is 100% focused on Configure Price Quote, also known as CPQ, and will provide you useful insights into this topic. My guest today is Cameron Marsh. Cameron is a senior analyst at Nucleus Research and covers CRM, marketing automation, and market analytics. Before he joined Nucleus Research, he worked in SaaS companies on consumer needs analysis and applied business solution. He holds a dual degree in finance and new media marketing from Rochester Institute of Technology and lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. Cameron, welcome to the CPQ podcast.
Thank you, Frank, for having me.
Very excited to have you, Cameron. Let's start by telling me a little bit more about what you did before you joined Nucleus Research.
Sure. First job out of college, I worked for this company called Metasced. They do health and human services, and that was really the first time that I got to actually see the value technology has for humans, right? So we used to go to trade shows all the time to, really see the net impact of, what the technology was doing and how it was helping those individuals. From there, I moved to Discovery Channel when I moved to Knoxville. There, my job was almost to be the middleman between the customer support team and the software engineers. So specifically, I worked on Discovery Plus. So when anyone had any issues with the app or the website, my job was to, comb through all of these incoming inquiries and figure out which ones are human error, which ones are bugs. There we were. That was kind of my first hands-on experience using technology. So they were a Zendesk company at the time. So that was my first taste on what that looked like from a user perspective. And from there, moved on to Nucleus. From pretty natural fit, honestly. What Nucleus does is we specialize in quantifying the value of technology. So the background I've had as a user made that pretty easy.
Yeah. And tell me, what's interesting for you about CPQ? How did you get even really started working on that?
So CPQ sort of found me more than I found it. When I was first looking to expand my coverage area, so I started off doing just core CRM. But naturally, every business on the planet has a lot more than just a CRM, right? So when I was talking to customers, there was always this third piece of the tech stack. So everyone had CRM, most had ERP, but there's this third piece of CPQ. So what drew me in originally was sort of how it connects all the dots, right? Sits the crossroads between sales, finance, operations. Not a flashy technology necessarily, but it's powerful, right? You can really see where all those hours of manual work turn into seconds, right, with automation. And once you quantify that, my boss was pretty happy that we found a new area where benefits were so easily tangible and easy to find the value.
Excellent. And let's talk a little bit about the briefings that you have with the vendors. And as part of that, it's also obviously interesting to see how many vendors you meet with anyway, right? But I think for you in general, instead of the vendors, it's probably more interesting to talk to the customers. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's a mixture of both, right? I meet with 15 to 20 different CPQ vendors over the course of the year, sometimes more with new entrants and updates, things like that. But yeah, the bulk of what I do is talking with end users, with customers. I probably speak to dozens a quarter, so over 100 a year for sure. But these conversations are where you really get to find out what's working, what is hype, what's actually moving the needle in terms of how value is actually being delivered. So yeah, that is really my core is talking to customers. That's what makes me tick, and that's the bulk of what I do. Yeah.
Excellent. And I think that's very interesting. But when you're briefed by a vendor, right? So I was wondering, what's your first tell that the product will or won't deliver tangible ROI for a customer?
It's all about how the vendor talks about outcomes. If they lead with our interface is sleek or we use I know that I'm going to start to have to dig for some substance. The better vendors on the flip side of that is talking about here's how our customers can cut quote cycle time by 30%, or our users close deals 2 weeks faster. If they have that sort of approach, that's how I know that they have a solid understanding of how they deliver value to their customers.
Excellent. And where do you turn to learn more about CPQ in general? Is there anything that's interesting that you can share today?
Yeah, so I'll give a couple of shout outs. So what I usually do is I speak to AR folks first. So Steven from Epicor is great. Krista Maddox with Infor is great. But they're the ones that always keep me up to date on what's going on. Oftentimes they even give me a little sneak peek behind the curtains ahead of time of what they're working on, things like that. But outside of working with vendors directly, most of it is LinkedIn. User groups are great. I follow yourself now on LinkedIn as well. So that's usually, I like to get it from the source, from people who are on the boots on the ground running every day, and people who are, really two hands in on, this stuff. Yeah.
Perfect. Then, before I ask you more questions about Nucleus, I was wondering, what do you like to do when you don't work?
Oh, that's a great question, Frank. My boss tells me I golf too much. That's really kind of what I love. So I spend quite a bit of time doing that. Part of the reason why I moved to Knoxville, love hiking. Really anything I can do outdoors is really what makes me tick.
Great. So let's go ahead and let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about Nucleus Research. What CPQ related products and services does Nucleus offer?
For sure. So our flagship deliverable is what we call the ROI case study. This case study is based off of real users, real experiences, real numbers, right? So we walk them through everything from what were the challenges you were facing, what specifically about the vendor made you want to go with them, how did they alleviate those challenges. Then usually we work with the finance teams to figure out how much are you spending on this technology, what have been the tangible benefits. We quantify all of that. We like to say that all value from technology can be boiled down into one of three buckets, right? You can save time, you can save money, or you can make more money. Because at the end of the day, every benefit can be boiled down into one of those three. From there, we have proprietary information. So we are the only research firm that is NASBA-certified, which is a really fancy way to say that we use accounting principles. So the same way we quantify value is the same way that a CFO is going to quantify value. We also have a couple other reports. Value Matrix is one of our other big ones. That is a ranking report that ranks vendors on both usability and functionality. So I think we're up to a little bit more than 30 of those now across all of our other analysts, updated annually, and really focuses on how well solutions actually deliver value in production, not just on paper. And then from there, we've got a couple other specialized reports. One of our big ones, we call it Anatomy of a Decision, right? So that's not just what the technology delivers from a value standpoint, but really also focuses on why did you choose this vendor? What specifically about that partnership made you want to sign with them? So that's a little bit about what we do.
Excellent. And for listeners that are new to Nucleus, how should they read the value matrix, right? So what does usability versus functionality really mean in the day-to-day operations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we look at functionality as what the product can do and usability as how easily can people actually do it, right? You could have the most feature-rich platform in the world, but if sales reps can't build quotes without 3 calls to IT, then you're not delivering value. In the field, usability translates directly into adoption, and adoption is really what drives ROI. So we consider things like ease of integration. How many technical experts do you need to tap into all the benefits the solution has to offer? So for that reason is really why we balance both equally on that matrix.
Got it. And in what geographic region sees Nucleus Research the highest demand? My experience is typically that it's much higher in North America than it is in other parts of the world.
For sure. North America is definitely our core market, especially at the enterprise level. But we're seeing strong momentum in Europe, APAC, really specifically around those mid-market cloud native tools. What's interesting though is that the European firms tend to be more value and compliance driven, actually. So they want proof, not promises, which really aligns perfectly with what we do in our ROI approach.
Excellent. And also, when you look at recent CPQ case studies, which one best illustrate hard benefits, right? So you get more revenue, you have headcount savings, your renewals work better. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, so over the past year, we've analyzed a pretty broad range of CPQ deployments across really all industries, from industrial manufacturing and technology to services, distribution. We're consistently seeing really measurable outcomes. Most common impact area we see is quote cycle efficiency. On average, organizations reducing quote creation time by 60 to 80%. What used to take several hours or even days can now be done in minutes. And that really does free up sales team and especially engineering staff for high value work. right? For a lot of companies, that translates to 20 to 30% increase in quote throughput with the same team size. So doing more without hiring more. Another really big area is error reduction, order accuracy. I think most, if not all, manufacturers specifically have way more complex coding than they did a couple years ago, just with the expansion and customization of products, different SKUs, everything like that. So being able to make sure that your sales guy can develop a quote that you can actually build in real life is really important, right? That way you don't get really far down into the procurement process and realize, hey, we can't build what you spec'd out. So avoiding that, as you can imagine, saves quite a bit of time and money. It sounds small, but that's about 2 to 4%. But when you're generating, hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue, that 2 to 4% all of a sudden matters quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think most recently, I think, and a lot of people don't necessarily think about it this way, but a lot of CPQ vendors talk about, helping you make more money, helping you cross sell, upsell, and that's true, and that's great. But where we're seeing a lot of value is more from, essentially not giving away margin unnecessarily. So pricing optimization. So, not discounting when you didn't need to discount, things like that. If you can protect those margins, even if you don't sell more, if you don't leave any money on the table, that generates quite a bit of ROI as well.
What sort of ROI can CPQ buyers realistically expect from CPQ in the first year compared to the second and third years? And why do these returns change over time based on your experience?
Yeah, and this is actually a really good question because originally, before you had sent over everything, I didn't know the answer to this question because we do all of our ROI case studies on like a 3-year annualized basis, right? So I had to kind of break into that a little bit more to see, benefits year one, year two versus year three and year four.
Yeah.
So if they're coming from nothing to something, it's usually in the neighborhood of 600% plus. And that's really just from the elimination of all the manual work that, if you don't have a CPQ solution that your sales reps or the rest of the team are going to have to do. But if you're coming from something to something, in general, it's 150 to 200% ROI in the first year. And then as it gets more mature and you start, taking advantage of additional features, it typically does climb past around 300%. The typical payback period on that is between 9 and 12 months. So obviously some are going to be a lot quicker than that. I've seen folks, especially if you're coming from nothing, you're up and running in a couple weeks and the payback is almost immediate, right? But on average, it's a little bit less than a year.
Excellent. Very good to know. Always very interesting numbers, right? So then let's talk a little bit about the technology value matrix, right? So I think what 2 or 3 things stood out to you to prior years, and you have seen any notable vendor movements or category changes?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, especially for this last matrix, or we have an upcoming one in a few weeks as well, but it's really AI functionality. That's really what starts to differentiate leaders a little bit. Things like natural language product searching or intelligent configuration suggestions, being able to ask in plain language, hey, build me a quote that has XYZ with this widget that can't do this because they're in this market. And then the quote just builds it, right? That's really cool. And I think it's really one of the things that's starting to differentiate folks because, when we consider functionality, we're not talking about the arms race to have every possible, bell and whistle on the product, right? We're talking about which ones are easily adopted by customers and which ones are actually delivering value, right? And really AI or that section of AI around quoting specifically is really the big one. A secondary one, pricing optimization. I talked a little bit about that earlier, but just really the ability to not rely on gut feelings as a salesperson to, make the most margins you possibly can, right? That's really another one that really sets folks apart.
Excellent. And then I have a question for you, which is probably interesting to lots of listeners, right? So because I would break that up into 2 parts. One part is that's user visible, so you have a chatbot or something like that. And the other part is on the administrative side, when I set up the products that I want to sell. Where do you see the biggest benefits for customers at this point?
I would say on the back end. And the reason I say that is that AI is only as good as the data that it's founded on, right? So when AI isn't working, it's because of, rule constraints or something isn't set up the right way, right? So if you can have an AI framework of, how to best set that up, that's really what then is the engine that then delivers every other return, right? So you kind of have to start there. So I think really on the more on the back end for sure.
Excellent. Got it. And which AI capabilities do you think have more measurable outcomes from your point of view, and which is more demoware?
Another great question. So let me think about that. One that comes up almost every conversation I have right now is the AI theater in the CPQ space, right? Big promises or slick demos, but when you strip all of that away, the measurable impact is really happening in a few specific areas. The first one is guided configuration, content generation. So I just talked a little bit about that, but when you can use AI to recommend compatible components or filling gaps in complex configurations or even quote descriptions, right? Sounds small, but for teams that are building large multi-line quotes, saving a few minutes off every deal really, really adds up,
Yeah.
right? For some of the bigger organizations, that's hundreds of hours saved each quarter. Next one is pricing intelligence, discount analysis. Using AI to look at historical data and spot patterns. For example, if you can identify discounts that actually drive wins and which ones just erode margin, right? Not over discounting. Don't give, some percentage off in one area if you don't need to. That's led to measurable improvements, deal probability, success rate, average deal size, everything like that. Then the last big one is accuracy and approval automation. AI can now flag anomalies, sorry. So it doesn't have to go through a chain of command now to be sent out. So that, pretty significantly accelerates your ability to get the quote back out to the customer in an efficient way. But it also really helps just not doing a bunch of rework. I think for a lot of organizations, they used to have a team that their sole purpose was to rectify all the mistakes of other people, right? And not only is that a very menial job, it's not a fun job either, right? You're just fixing mistakes all day. And now those teams don't exist anymore. Those folks were able to go back to what their original job was, which is to manage the sales team. So being able to redeploy those employees saves quite a bit in headcount as well.
Are you evaluating CPQ solutions? The Novo CPQ briefing subscription gives you vendor-neutral briefs you can read in minutes. They are built for the early step of selection, moving from a long list to a focused shortlist of 5 to 10 vendors. Each brief explains capabilities, where it fits, and what to watch out for. No hype. Many subscribers pair the briefs with AI tools like ChatGPT or Gemini to search faster and compare options. If you want clarity before RFPs and demos start, learn more at novocpq.com/cpq-briefing-subscription. Shortlist faster. But I want to go back to one thing you mentioned earlier with the data, right? So, and I was wondering what specific types of data, like I have an idea, price lists or product rules, currently prevent AI from working well in CPQ, and what should leaders do to fix this data?
Overall, the biggest challenge holding AI back in CPQ right now really isn't the technology. Again, it's the data it's built on. Everyone's excited about AI, but the reality is that most organizations are trying to apply machine learning to data that's incomplete, honestly, or just plain messy, honestly. Biggest three problem areas I see: inconsistent product rules, outdated or fragmented price lists, and ultimately just poor integration as well. On the product side, it's common to find configuration logic that's filled with exceptions, right? Every time a manager says, oh, that rule only applies to one customer, or we'll just override that manually, you create a lot of complexity that just breaks AI's ability to recognize reliable patterns. If the system can't trust the data, it can't automate anything with confidence. Same goes for pricing data. Many companies still manage price books across multiple spreadsheets, regions, business units, but they don't reconcile them regularly, and that leads to duplication, control issues, outdating pricing hierarchies. And then when AI tries to recommend prices or detect discount trends, it's learning from bad input, and that leads to bad output. And lastly is integration. More recently, more CRM integration, which often gets overlooked. If your customer data isn't aligned with your pricing and product data, the AI can't connect the dots in deal history, customer type, or profitability even. For example, if discounts aren't logged accurately in the CRM, the system can't tell which pricing strategies actually work. So all in all, it's just build the foundation right the first time, or else AI is never going to deliver the value that you expect it to, or at least want it to.
Now let's talk a little bit about channel CPQ and direct sales CPQ. So channel CPQ is for me, you're selling via, I have an idea, distributors, resellers, partners who sell your product or service on your behalf. Are you seeing faster payback from channel CPQ or direct sales, and why?
So it really depends on where the biggest pain points are for this one, right? But generally speaking, channel CPQ tends to show faster payback in the first year. And really the reason is this, it fixes the most expensive and messy parts of the quoting process. When you've got a network of distributors or resellers that are creating quotes on your behalf, there's almost always going to be inconsistency, right? Partners might be using outdated price sheets, quoting products that aren't compatible, or just applying wrong discount structure. And every one of those creates a lot of errors and costs time and money. Now, on direct side, on the other hand, typically shows ROI over a slightly longer horizon, but it tends to be a little bit larger. It's more about compounding efficiency rather than quick wins on the direct sales side. So, direct sales teams see bigger gains in areas like renewal automation or margin control, quote velocity, right? And once a sales organization gets used to that AI assisted pricing and automated approvals, they start spending less time chasing signatures or, all the other things that aren't actually selling. So it really does depend on, what the biggest pain points are. Because, some pain points cost more time and money than others, right? But in general, that's what I'm seeing.
Excellent. Then let's talk about beyond AI, right? So which capabilities could be all kinds of stuff. So I have an idea, visualization, deal desk automation, billing, e-signature, and there's even more, right? So which
Yeah.
of these are key to improve win rate or your margin or customers' margin?
Yeah, so again, it depends on the vertical, right? Well, we'll use manufacturing as an example here, right? When you strip away all the AI buzzwords, the features that actually move that needle are the ones that remove friction between people and systems, right? The technology itself isn't entirely responsible for creating ROI. It's just the simplification of how sales, finance, and operations work together. So, using this as an example, right? One of the biggest ROI drivers we found recently is visualization. So, when customers can see exactly what they're buying, whether it's a piece of heavy equipment or a complex assembly or a new boat that you want to make sure fits in your garage, right? They gain confidence earlier in that sales process. Reducing that back and forth, it really does lower that rework cost and shortens the overall sales cycle. So we've seen organizations cut quote revisions by double digits, 25%, right, on average, just by implementing simple visualization tools that make it easier for buyers to approve what they see. Next major one, deal desk automation, right? For most companies, deal desks are really become bottlenecks sometimes, right? Where reps will submit requests for approvals and then legal has to check the terms, finance checks the margins, and then everyone loses a day or two of momentum. Not fun for anyone, right? But when you can automate parts of that process using rules or thresholds or really any guided workflow, we've seen up to 85% reduction in manual review time. So being able to get that quote onto the digital desk of whoever you're trying to have sign that contract faster increases the probability they're actually going to sign it by about 12%. But again, over the course of the year, that 12% adds up a bunch, right? And lastly, and this is really not flashy or anything, but e-signature, right? Such a small feature, people overlook it, but it directly accelerates revenue recognition, right? When approvals and signatures happen electronically, deals close faster, and that improves cash flow. So while AI gets the headlines, right, these fundamental process improvements with visualization, automation, e-signature are really what are still driving most of the measurable ROI today.
Excellent. And I'm really impressed with all the percentages that you have memorized, right? It's really fun to listen to it and look at CPQ from a different perspective, right? So, very, very helpful. Now, I'm interested in your advice to vendors, right? So, because I'm pretty sure everyone's eager to climb your matrix, right? And where they should invest to do that. What would you tell them? What can they do to improve their ratings?
The best advice I can give is not to chase headlines, but rather chase outcomes, right? Vendors that consistently move up in our matrix do really two things extremely well. They make their software easier to use and they make it deliver measurable, quantifiable results for their customers. On the usability side, that's really about how quickly a customer can go from implementation to impact, right? And it's not just how intuitive is the platform itself, not just how easy, from like a user standpoint with fewer clicks or whatever, but how easy, how nicely does it play with the rest of your tech stack? Do you need a small army of IT folks to, get it up and running to maintain it every day? So the usability side, that really comes from customers. Moving up and down on that is really all customer word of mouth. Because myself as an analyst, I would never pretend, and it's not my job to say, are you easier or harder to use than everybody else, right? That would be unfair to have it all fall on one person. So it comes from customer testimonials. On the functionality side, though, that comes more from vendors. That comes more from roadmap. Typically, the leaders in the matrix are those folks that, a little bit further right tend to have features that drive business outcomes, right? It's not just that arms race to have all the bells and whistles. It's the things that actually, deliver value. So integrations, embedded analytics, intelligent automation, they're not nice to have features, those ones that really do kind of move the needle. They're the capabilities that shorten cycle times, improve accuracy, and raise deal margins. So overall, my rule of thumb is every new enhancement should do one of two things. It should save time or it should make money. If it doesn't clearly do either, then it's not necessarily a new feature that's going to move the dot on the matrix towards functionality.
Very interesting. So now let's assume two vendors are pretty close, right? So and you need to have a tiebreaker. What criteria would you use for the tiebreaker then to rate one higher than the other or one lower than the other?
So a lot of that comes from buying intentions, oddly enough. So for example, if there's two vendors that in theory should be in the exact same place, I'll talk to a bunch of customers and figure out, did you choose it based on its functionality or did you choose it based on its usability? If enough customers tend to say more usability side, we'll bump them a little bit in that direction. And likewise for the functionality. So tiebreakers usually come down to what customers have told me, which, can ruffle some feathers a bunch. But at the end of the day, I'm just a messenger boy, right? My job is to, take what customers have told me and then put that out in the market.
Fair enough, and that makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk a little bit about integrations. CPQ is a lot about integrations, right? Not just to CRM and ERP, but there's a lot of other three-letter systems that they need to integrate with. Which one of these integrations do you consider table stakes that a vendor should have anyway?
So the two
And that
mandatory,
bring real measurable ROI, right? So most importantly.
yeah, so I think the two mandatory ones, CRM and ERP, those are really the foundation. They're ensuring that all your customer data or product data can flow seamlessly. And without those, you're kind of coding in a silo, and that creates a lot of risk and inefficiency. Now, once you've got that foundation and you want to look to extend beyond that, next I would say billing, inventory, and maybe this is just top of mind because I spoke about it recently, but service management, right?
Mm.
So with that example, right? If you're integrating CPQ with billing, you're closing that loop from quote to cash. No manual reentry of prices or terms, so invoices start to go out faster and more accurately. That reduces your DSO, days sales outstanding, and improves cash flow. So that's direct measurable value. So for inventory, that again helps eliminate quoting errors for unavailable products or materials. I think that's a big one now because overnight supply chains are disrupted, right? Or maybe you have a new shipment of widgets that's now stuck at the border for 1,000 different reasons, right? So being able to have access to that when you're quoting things helps a lot. Prevents delivery delays and really builds that customer trust. The last one for service management is really just ensuring that once a deal closes, your downstream teams know exactly what was sold and configured, right? So fewer warranty issues, better support, higher satisfaction, and we actually see that playing a role into retention as well. So for folks that rely a lot on subscription models and things like that, that really is really important. So while CRM, ERP are table stakes, if you're coming from nothing to something again, yes, sure, definitely do that. But if you're starting to get a little bit more mature with your technology, those real ROI multipliers are the operational integrations that bring quoting, fulfillment, and billing all into that one unified process.
Very interesting. Now, let's look at what would you consider a non-obvious habit, right? So you use to separate marketing claims from measurable customer value in CPQ.
Yeah, so the thing I always do is I just bluntly ask for customer name and email. What I mean by that is like, if a vendor says our customers are quoting 40% faster, we're improving margins by X percent, I ask, who? How'd you measure it? If they can't, provide that information, it's a sign that it's a marketing tactic rather than a verified outcome. Now, that doesn't happen very often now, and most of the vendors aren't guilty of this. But we really do base all of our analysis on quantified results, right? So when it comes to writing our own research or, considering where vendors should place on a value matrix, vendor claims are great, but we don't actually use any of that when we do our analysis. If it doesn't come from that customer mouth, I just pretend it doesn't exist, right? So on the flip side of that, though, when a vendor can confidently say company X reduced, cycle time by 70%, right? And I recognize a logo, and a lot of times I've spoken to that customer at a conference, I know that it's legit, right? So that really does help too.
And let me dig a little bit deeper on this one, right? So for listeners
Okay.
to understand. So it's like, okay, so you're talking to how many customers to make this claim, let's say, of a 50% improvement, right? So you talk to
Mhm.
three customers, to 5, to 10. How do you feel confident that the number that you have is good?
Yeah, so at this point, luckily, Nucleus as a whole has done enough research so if like a data point seems out of reach, right, we then will kind of dig a little bit deeper. So we kind of have, our minimum thresholds or like Q tests, right? We have everything that we use to identify outliers. So that's what we do. But then too, we'll just like and a lot of times it takes talking to one additional person at that company, right? So say for example, one team is accelerating quote efficiency by 95%. It's like, okay, well, were they using something else before the rest of the team or the rest of the company as a whole? And you talk to someone else and they're like, oh, for us it was more like 20%. Okay, now that makes sense. Right. So now you can kind of see how that fits into the broader ecosystem of what they're doing. But yeah, it's just at this point, you can just kind of instinctively tell when a number feels too good to be true, and a lot of times it generally is, honestly.
Super interesting, but unfortunately, we're coming to the end of this episode. Hence, my last question. What's a good way for interested listeners to contact you in case they have any questions for you? And what are any events where they could potentially see you?
Yeah, so thankfully I'm off until the spring, which is great. So the for right now, the easiest way is LinkedIn. Cameron Marsh, Analyst, Nucleus Research. Try to be really good about. We do a lot of video content on there. Get a lot of DMs all the time, people asking questions. I always do my best to respond pretty quickly. Try to make myself as available as possible to really anyone who's got any questions about the value of technology as a whole.
Excellent. We will have all this information in the show notes so people can reach out to you. Cameron, thank you very much for making time for the CPQ podcast today.
Thank you so much, Frank, for having me.
I'd like to thank everyone for listening and hope you learned something interesting today. If you like the podcast, please go ahead and rate it on iTunes or share it with your friends and colleagues. In the meantime, you can find us online at www.novocpq.com. So long, everyone.